Hi, welcome to the Elle Russ Show, where I deliver content intended to inspire, educate, and motivate. Engage with me online at elleruss.com and on social media. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, just a quick 1-minute announcement to let you know about my virtual courses and free masterclasses. I have courses and free masterclasses based on both of my books. I have the Ultimate Thyroid Course. This is your answer to solving any thyroid issue, whether it be Hashimoto's, radioactive iodine, thyroidectomy after thyroid cancer, or just general hypothyroidism. Reverse T3 issues as well. It's an incredible value at 17 modules and 29 hours of content with amazing guest expert tutorials. I also offer the Ultimate Confidence Course. That is 15 modules and 14 hours with also a few guest expert tutorials. An incredible value, and I have free masterclasses on both of those topics as well. Visit elleruss.com to learn more. Hey everyone, today my guest is Jason Feifer. He is the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, a podcast host, book author, keynote speaker, startup advisor, and nonstop optimism machine. You guys are going to love him. His goal is to help you become more resilient and adaptable in a world of constant change so that you can seize new opportunity before anyone else does. We're going to talk about his life and also his book, Build for Tomorrow, an action plan for embracing change, adapting fast, and future-proofing your career. You can visit jasonfeifer.com. That's F-E-I-F-E-R, jasonfeifer.com for more information. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, wow, you do a lot. You have a lot of amazing experience. We are going to get into your book called Build for Tomorrow, an action plan for embracing change, adapting fast, and future-proofing your career. So excited about that. But listen, you are the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, which, I mean, look, that's very impressive for most people to have risen to that level. You're also a podcast host, author, as we mentioned, keynote speaker. I mean, you're and even self-described nonstop optimism machine. So let's just start off with, how did you get here? I mean, did you plan on being a writer in college? Was that always a desire, or was this something that came out of left field in your life?
Oh, no, so part of this came out of left field. The part that came out of left field was being an entrepreneur and everything else that you described. But the thing that did not come out of left field was that I knew at the very beginning that I was interested in writing and particularly interested in reporting. And I just wanted to put that to the greatest use possible. I felt like we should all figure out what's the intersection of the thing that we're interested in and the thing that we're good at, because not everything that we're interested in, we're good at, and not everything that we're good at, we're interested in. But I've always been searching for that intersection. I started just as a community newspaper reporter. I graduated college. I went to a tiny little paper. I eventually realized that my ambitions would not be met by just being really good at working at a tiny paper. So I quit. I just had this idea that I should go to people instead of waiting for them to come to me, because they never would. And so I quit. I freelanced, sort of proving myself to others, and eventually came to realize that the greatest thing that I could do throughout my career was to ask really two questions wherever I went, which was, what do I need to learn? And have I learned it? And so I would move through the media world always asking that question, those questions. What do I need to learn? Okay, I need to learn how to be a punchier editor at a magazine. So I go to Men's Health and I'll learn how to do that for a couple of years. And then I'll ask myself, have I learned it? Yes, I have. Okay, time to move on. Like, we are not going to stay here and be comfortable and just be at Men's Health for the next 10 years, because I'm not going to grow that way. So I would just push myself to constantly leave. I've never, ever, in my entire career, I've never got a job offer and then come back to my boss and said, hey, I got another offer. Can you match it? Never. Because when I'm ready to leave, I'm ready to leave. It's time to learn. And that's how I grew. Malcolm Gladwell once told me that self-conceptions are powerfully limiting, that if you have a too narrow idea of who you are, then you turn down all these opportunities that don't match this narrow vision of yourself. And I've tried to really build a career that has taken that to heart, and it has allowed me to find these opportunities that didn't really fit into whatever path it seemed I was on many years ago.
With all of the constant, and again, related to your book, embracing all this change, adapting, keep continuing to move. I love that you said, hey, you never stayed somewhere. You're ready to go. You're ready to move on, onwards and upwards. That is so the opposite of most people. And what I have found is that people are, let's say they've declared themselves a thing. It doesn't matter if they went to law school and now they're a lawyer, but they hate it now 3 years in. But it's really often the perception of what others may think of the change that they make versus them, right? And what they want to do. It's always this, well, what will people think? Oh, I declared myself as that. And if I had listened to any of that, and I'm sure you would agree, we wouldn't even be where we are, which is all these amazing unknown experiences that happened because we weren't too attached. I mean, I remember even when I was writing sketch comedy and someone asked me to do a documentary, and then like I did books, I remember it being a weird detachment, Jason, oh wait, but I was drawn over here, but yet there's this identity. So can we talk about that? Because I know you've probably come across a lot of that with people, and I know people listening right now, that's a big part of maybe the resistance to change.
One of the best, I totally agree. One of the stories I love that I think captures what you're describing really well comes from this woman, Stacey London, whose name may be familiar to people. She was the co-host of a show called What Not to Wear on TV for like 10 or whatever years. And Stacey's a friend. Stacey had a really interesting experience because she started as a fashion editor at magazines, and then she got this job as what not to wear. And those two things really shaped her understanding of herself, that she was a fashion expert and she was a television personality. And then and that served her well for a very long time, right? Like she was on TV for a long time. She had multiple shows, very successful career. But by the time she reached around 50, television executives didn't really want to work with her anymore. And it was a real blow to her, not just ego, but really sense of self. And around that same time, she was a beta tester for a company called State of Menopause that makes products that address menopausal symptoms. And then the parent company came to her and said, hey, we're looking to offload this brand. You've been so enthusiastic about it. Do you want to buy it and be CEO? And Stacey said, no, because that's not what she is, right? She's a fashion person, she's a television personality, not a owner of a company and a CEO. What does that even mean? But then she stepped back, she told me, and she realized that she was looking for what she said, her kernel of truth, which is a phrase I really like. And she said that ultimately she realized, she's not a fashion person. She's not a television personality. She is someone who helps people build a sense of self. And that's what she had done through all of her work. And that is something that she could do at State of Menopause too. It's a transferable skill. It is the part of her that does not change in times of change. And that's the thing that we all need to build within ourselves. Now, Stacey, after realizing that, did go on to buy the company, and that's now what she's doing. And I think everybody needs to detach themselves from identifying too closely with the output of their work, with the thing that they do, the thing that they make, the role that they occupy, and instead try to figure out how to define yourself in a way in which you are not anchored to something that is easily changed, but instead you are aware of the part of you that does not change in times of change.
Well, and then if we don't onward and upward or move through change or try something different, then where's the failure being feedback, right? Where is the trial and error that is inherent in being an entrepreneur and even a successful one, right? Without those mistakes or the little things or I went in one direction once and I was excited about something and did it and it went well, but then I thought, no, you know what? I don't want to do it. And so I stopped doing it. You know what I mean? But at least I did it to know that, versus sitting around still wondering, I wonder if I had done that.
And I think that's great. And this is a lesson for entrepreneurs or, people working in a company. It doesn't matter. If you are not pushing yourself towards those new experiences, you're right. You're not getting the failure, which is really data. And I always think back to there was a magazine, sort of be anonymous about it, but there was one of the magazines that I've worked at, and I've worked at a number of them, had a editor, a very, very senior editor who I had to work with a lot. And this guy was my least favorite person I've ever worked with. I thought he was terrible at his job. I thought he was a terrible person to work with. He was mean, and he was closed-minded. And here's the thing about him. He started as an intern, which means that he had never worked anywhere else. And at this point, he was middle-aged, and he had a very calcified idea of exactly what he does and what everyone else should do and what belongs in this magazine and what does not. And as a result, I thought that he was constantly missing opportunities to encourage new ideas, to engage with exciting new changes, because he had been in one place for so long that he had never exposed himself to what it means to be adaptable and to bring new ideas and breathe new life into things. Now, that's not to say that somebody can't have a wonderful long career somewhere. You certainly can. It's not to say that starting as an intern and working your way up is a bad thing. It's actually can be a wonderful thing. But in this case with this guy, I think that him being in one place for too long was actually was a destructive force, and we should be pushing ourselves to not always tank whatever we're doing, not abandon things necessarily, but to make sure that we're really exposing ourselves to new ideas and to new challenges, because that's where new ideas really come from.
Now, you talk about how we experience change in 4 phases, right? First is panic, then we adapt, then we find this new normal. And then finally, we reach this phase where we could not have even imagined in the beginning that the moment, right? Where we realize that we wouldn't go back. I've been there many, many times. What's an experience in your life with all of the things you've done where you did have that first phase of panic? What was that like? Tell us a little bit about that. And if that didn't happen for you, maybe someone you've coached or worked with.
Oh yeah, no, it's happened to me plenty of times. I mean, it's funny. One of the ones was, in a way, what brings me to talk to you right now. So when I became editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, which was in 2016, my career up until that point had really been a media career. I was a reporter in newspapers, and I was an editor at different magazines. And when I came to Entrepreneur, I really just saw it as another media project. I'm going to come in here, I'm going to refresh this magazine. It's going to be lots of fun. And then about a year into it, I started getting these requests to be interviewed, and on podcasts, at events, whatever the case was. And people would always ask me, or rather they would introduce me as like, they'd say, "Hey, we got Jason Feifer, thought leader in entrepreneurship here." And I was so uncomfortable with that, because I didn't feel like I could live up to it. And so I would always try to reel it back in. I would say, "Oh, I'm not a thought leader. I'm just a guy who writes stories, and, I don't even know that much about business." And it was awful, because I was like destroying the reason that people were having me on whatever they were having me on.
Just giving the big F you to the compliment too.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Also, it was just terrible, but I didn't know what else to do. And so eventually I was telling my wife about this, and she said, if they want you to be a thought leader, then just be a thought leader. And I realized that the only difference between a thought leader and not a thought leader is that the thought leader is willing to call themselves a thought leader. And I thought to myself, well, what would it mean if I embraced the thing that people expect of me? It's uncomfortable. I don't really know how to do it. I don't know how to talk like this. I don't know what it would lead to these things that I also don't know how to do. I don't know how to give a keynote on a stage, but the more I sat with it, the more excited I got by the idea of transforming myself into this thing that people seemed to be giving me permission to be, but that I was not giving myself permission to be. And so the very, very slow, methodical, lots of failure process began really from 2016, 2017 to now, where I redefined who I am. And as a result, I think of myself as so different right now. I also have very different economic opportunities as a result, because I'm not just working at a magazine, although I am still doing that, but I do all these other things as well that drive a lot of revenue for me. And, but it really forced me to rethink everything and to put myself in new situations over and over again, stand on stage in front of hundreds of people and have no idea if I was any good at it, in order to get to the point where I felt confident that I had something new and valuable. And that is definitely a wouldn't go back moment for me.
Well, on the subject of confidence, which is one of my wheelhouses, is that first of all, the first scenario you described, it often happens the other way around. It's the person wants to be someone and they're waiting for permission. Right?
Yeah,
They're
right,
waiting for
right.
permission, which is not how that works. And then, which is so interesting, you had it the opposite way. And I mean, I can see that happening too. So that's a really great point. And
You
then
know,
in general, you just having the confidence to go, well, F it. Like you were confident enough to at least attempt the first keynote to go, you know what, maybe I'm going to suck. And you know what, maybe I won't. Like that's still extreme confidence because you're okay with failure, which I think is literally probably one of the most ancestral qualities we can have. Our ancestors only saw failure as feedback. They didn't wallow in self-pity and despair because they effed up a hunt or whatever it was. So
right.
I really appreciate that about you, that you still had the confidence to say, well, you know what, it may not work out. I could be bad at this, but I'm going to take a stab.
I appreciate that, but I also want to make sure that it doesn't sound like either too easy or that it's something that I just had programmed in me, right? He had the confidence and therefore he could do it. And
No,
maybe
I'm
if,
sure there was a lot
right,
of self-talk involved when you
well,
getting up on
sure.
that
And so
stage.
that's
Yeah.
where yeah, exactly. Which is where I wanted to go I'll share one quick story here, which is that I remember the very first keynote talk I ever gave. It was in Scottsdale, Arizona. I was opening up for Marcus Lemonis. I was in some ballroom somewhere, and I had written out this, or not written, because I don't believe in writing talks. Hot tip: don't write your talk out, because you'll try to memorize it word for word, and then you will either sound like you're reading it in your head, or you will lose your place and have no idea what to do. So instead, what I do is I kind of build talks. Even back then, I kind of understood I needed to build things off of stories that I've already told and ideas that I've already had. But anyway, I practiced this thing over and over again. I had outlined it. I was made sure that I had it down. I was pacing back and forth in my bedroom the night before at this hotel. And anyway, now I'm standing next to the stage. This guy is introducing me. I'm looking out. I see this room full of expectant entrepreneurs. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know if any of this is going to be good. I don't know what it's going to be like. I don't know if they're going to like it. I don't know if what I'm going to say sounds intelligent. What can I tell myself right now that helps me get on this stage? And then I thought of the answer, and the answer was, I cannot wait to do this the second time. I cannot wait to do this the second time, because if you frame the experience that way, then you realize that, look, no matter what happens when I stand on stage, I will know a lot more 30 minutes from now than I do right now.
That's right.
I will just have a wealth of experience that I don't have right now. And if the entire point of going out and doing it the first time is simply to get to the second time, then the bar is actually pretty low. Just go out and do it. And it doesn't matter if it was perfect, because it's not supposed to be perfect. It's literally just supposed to be getting to the next time. And that became something that I tell myself now all the time. Whenever I try something new, I just think, you know what, this first go round is not going to be the best, but as a result, it will be a lot better later. And there's no way to get to better without going through this. And so now that's what I do. And that's how I got out there. And I would say I was mediocre, and it was upwards from there.
That's another ability you have to have in, like if I am speaking with my friends, I've done a million interviews, and I'm sure you have too. And sometimes, you afterwards you're like, all right, not my best one, right? You know what I mean? You just, whatever it is, maybe I'm too businesslike on one, or not, whatever the situation is. And to be able to self-criticize in a positive way, right? Like, so if we're speaking to someone that didn't know me, and I was saying, oh, well, on this interview, I probably didn't do that, or I should have done that, or I noticed this, someone might be like, oh, no, you were fine. Like, because they think I'm feeling bad about it. And I'm like, no, I'm just legit criticizing myself, like from an outside objective viewpoint. I'm not even taking what I say about myself personally. And I think that that's something you have to have if you're going to be a public speaker, because there's going to be those moments, right? I mean, look, I a little TMI, but I remember it was like the second day of my menstrual period, and I had to get up and speak to a bunch of people. Oh my God, I was brain dead. I was, I think I spaced out for a minute during this. It went well, it was fine, but it wasn't maybe my best moment. But everyone else, what I think you've probably found too, is that even your mediocre-ish thing still does the job if you're at a certain level or you get to a certain level, and to be able to self-criticize without, I've interviewed people for the first time and they're like, I haven't heard it yet. Everyone else has listened to it. I'm scared to listen to it. And I'm just like, listen, we have to bite the bullet at some point, because you just have to learn. Right. And usually people are like, wow, actually, I was pretty good.
Mhm.
I don't know what thoughts you have on that, but I just
Oh,
think
I
the
have plenty.
self-criticism is important. But if done, you and I would do it in this healthy way we're talking about, it's just objective, right?
Yeah. Okay. Boy, I have a lot to say about that. So first of all, yes, even though I mean, I have a lot of experience doing this stuff. Right. I've been interviewed on national television. I've been interviewed on major podcasts in front of very large crowds, but I still totally, every once in a while, for reasons I can't really explain, I just turn in like a B- performance, and I know what's happening at the time, and I just can't turn it around. But then a couple interesting things happen afterwards. Number one is that most people don't notice, right? Because people don't, like, part of the problem is that as soon as you kind of go into this what if thinking, counterfactual thinking, as psychologists call it, then you're comparing what you did against a kind of imagined reality of how it could have been better. But that's not how people experience things that they're watching. So if somebody's listening to a podcast that you did and you thought it was just so performance, they're not listening to it and comparing it against some imagined version of how this thing that they're hearing could be better. right? Like,
Yes.
only you're doing that.
That's
So
right.
so they're taking it on face value, and at face value, it's fine. Like, okay, fine. Could it have been better? Sure, maybe, but that doesn't mean that it was terrible. And I have experienced this many times. I mean, I'll tell you, when my book came out in September, and I lined up a lot of big podcasts for it, and two of the podcasts that I did, which was, I did Lewis House's School of Greatness show, and I did Gary Vaynerchuk's Gary V Audio Experience, whatever his podcast is called. And both times, I as soon as it was over, I thought to myself, I felt empty. I thought, I have blown it. Like, I wasn't as sharp as I wanted to be. I had this big opportunity to reach this large audience, and I just sucked. And I beat myself up over it. And in fact, the second time, I was beating myself up so much that that's when I started to research, and I was like, what is this? What am I doing? And that's where I discovered counterfactual thinking, and then started calling some researchers about counterfactual thinking to understand what was happening in my head. And which was very interesting. And but then here's the craziest thing is, like, I beat myself up. I'm obsessing over how terrible this was. And then the episodes came out, and then people started reaching out, and they were like, oh, hey, that was great. I heard you on whatever. Right. Yep. And it's like, and then I go back and I listen to it, and yes, I can hear all the places where if I had to do it over, I could have done better. Sure. But I'm listening to myself fresh, just trying to imagine what somebody else is hearing, and it sounds totally fine. You almost have to remind yourself that your B- is still someone else's A, right?
Yes.
Like your measurement is way off. And also, zero people in the world, zero people in the world are walking around thinking, boy, Jason Feifer could have been 20% better on Gary Vaynerchuk's podcast, right? Like, zero people are focusing that much. You are the only person who's thinking about that. So take that stuff away. But one more thing I learned about counterfactual thinking, which was really interesting, is that one of the great dangers of counterfactual thinking is that it can trigger what's called the availability heuristic, which we tend to believe something is true if it is easy to remember, or if we repeat it a lot. So the more that you tell yourself this thing over and over again, the truer it becomes. This is why misinformation is dangerous, because if you hear something that's incorrect too many times, you remember it, and therefore it feels true. So one of the people I spoke to is a researcher at Wake Forest University who studies counterfactual thinking. He said, you know what? One of the best ways to counter counterfactual thinking is add more noise. Just start to consider other options, because what you're usually doing is you're saying, oh, if only this one thing had changed, then it would have been better. But you don't really know that. You don't know what could have made it better. You're just making that up in your head. So why don't you imagine 30 different scenarios, some of which in which you did much worse, some of which they may not have even run the episode because you sucked so much. Like, after that, like, now you have so many counterfactuals to imagine that the one that you keep harping on doesn't feel quite as true anymore.
All right. I know we have some limited time with you and so grateful that you stopped by, but let's, well, first of all, I definitely want you to share because you work with people one-on-one as well. Can you at least tell us before we talk about the book a little bit, how we can benefit from you personally?
Oh, I mean, so number one, you could get the book that I wrote, which is called Build for Tomorrow. I do some one-on-one consulting, and I also do some startup advising. You could just contact me through my website, jasonfeifer.com, if anyone wants to explore any of that.
That's great. I just want to let people know that you are available for those types of consultations. And then
Thanks.
let's talk about Build for Tomorrow. Now, it's designated to accelerate this process, this 4-phase experience of change.
Yeah.
I know we're sort of down on time here, last few minutes, but what are some, tips on the topics we've talked about that you already haven't given about how people can look at this change? If someone's like, in their dead-end job, or they want to leave and they don't want to get the raise and the promotion anymore, and they want to grow, whatever it may be, but the change is scary.
Yeah, right. So, and change is scary because most people equate change with loss, and that's how we end up in a panic. Look, there's a lot to say here. I'll tell you just two quick things. Number one is to what you just described. I recently got an email from a friend, an old friend I actually hadn't talked to in decades, but he was like a college friend, and he had heard what I was up to these days, and wrote for some advice, and said, look, he's been working at this hotel for 15 years and wants to crawl out of his skin every time he shows up, but he cannot imagine leaving because he's been there for 15 years. And what he asked what to do. And I said, look, sometimes the biggest challenge here is that if change feels too big, it feels too disruptive, then it's like we cannot imagine what it is that comes next, and therefore we do nothing. So I said to him, and I say to you, one of the first things you need to do is just get comfortable with the very idea of doing something new. So maybe you're not ready to leave a job of 15 years, even though you're not really happy there anymore. But you know what you could do is you could go out and take dancing lessons, right? Which is actually what he decided to do with his wife, because you just need to kind of work up the muscle of change, and start with something small and see how that can be beneficial to you, that it adds something new to your life, and you start to get kind of excited about other ideas and other images of yourself, and work up to it. Like, I interviewed Katie Milkman, who's a professor and researcher at Wharton, who studies how people change. And she said one of the big problems we have is that we think of everything that we do as permanent. And so as a result, we kind of don't do many new things because we're afraid of committing to them. But what would happen if you instead just thought of things as experiments? And it's just the purpose of doing it is just to see if it's okay. And you're giving yourself some amount of time to try it before deciding whether or not to continue to pursue it. And once you think of it that way, you really liberate yourself to try and explore new things. Annie Duke just wrote this great book called Quit. And she told me she's arguing for how quitting can be a really valuable decision-making strategy, and how quitting gets a bad rap. And she said to me, look, you got to think of it like dating, right? If you couldn't quit a relationship, like ever, right, then the first person that you date is also the person who you're going to marry. Well, you're not going to go on you're not going to
never going to go on a date.
Never going to do it. Right. So like the reason why we are able to find the right relationships is because we are able to quit the ones that don't work. It's the only way to do it. So let's think of it like that. And then one more thing that I'll tell you is a line that I got from Ryan Reynolds. I interviewed Ryan Reynolds for Entrepreneur Magazine a couple of years ago, and he, in addition to being an actor, has this marketing agency called Maximum Effort, and owns Aviation Gin and Mint Mobile. And we were talking about how to adapt to new things. And he said, to be good at something, you must be willing to be bad. And I love that because he's right. Nobody is good at something at the beginning. So if our measure of success is, am I good at this at the beginning, then the answer is going to be no, and you're never going to try something new. So instead, what Ryan Reynolds is saying, and he's correct, is that the difference maker is not whether or not someone is good at something at the beginning, but rather whether they are able to tolerate being bad for long enough to get to good. And once we think of it like that, then it's really just a challenge of whether or not we can tolerate being bad. And I think it's a lot easier to do that when you know that being bad is just part of the process.
I love it. Great place to end. So we'll put everything to connect with you in the show notes, but everybody listening, jasonfeifer.com, and that's Feifer. Thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, get a copy of his book, Build for Tomorrow. Any last words?
Oh, well, I appreciate it. Also available in audiobook and ebook, so you check it out in any format you want. I would say, look, a phrase I use a lot in the book is reconsider the impossible, and that's what I would invite you to do. Sometimes the things that we think are impossible are actually the greatest ideas, and the only reason we haven't pursued them is because we thought they weren't worth pursuing. So take another look.
Love it. Thank you so much. And for everyone else, we'll see you next week.
Hey listeners, over the years, a ton of companies have approached me to collaborate, but I will only promote companies whose products I believe in and that I actually use and consume on a regular basis. So let me tell you about some of my favorite companies that I can offer you discounts for. Rep Provisions, an amazing company doing incredible things for our planet, topsoil, and animals with regenerative agriculture, and it's my #1 source for quality pasture-raised meat and chicken. Visit repprovisions.com and use code L15 for 15% off. I'm also obsessed with a company called Carnivore Crisps. They make a lean, all-natural, and delicious alternative to conventional snacking, made with just real meat and real salt. Totally addictive, and my favorite ones are the beef brisket and the ribeye. Visit carnivorecrisps.com and use code PALEO10 for 10% off. I also love and regularly use Paleo Valley products. They make amazing supplements and delicious paleo products. I use the superfood greens powder, grass-fed beef sticks, the organ complex, and their bone broth bars. I love the lemon and apple. I also use their essential C complex and more. Visit paleovalley.com/promos/Elle Russ for 15% off. I also love Primal Kitchen. They make delicious paleo-approved, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and no refined sugar products, and I use them daily, from their collagen powders and sauces and marinades to their avocado and olive oil. So good, so healthy. Visit primalkitchen.com and use code L10 for 10% off. I also love paleo powder and use it almost on everything I cook. They make incredible seasoning blends, and they also have these incredible grain-free coatings that feel just like crispy breadings that you would have had prior to knowing that there's another way. So visit paleopowder.com and use code L15 for 15% off.